introduction. It is a great honor to be here, and thank you for staying on till Friday. I know the fourth day is not very easy for everyone, and welcome to this session. Before I get into my presentation, I wish to make a few acknowledgements to people who have been significant in bringing me here, not just to Costa Rica, but also to ICCP. So my work was first discovered by Paweł Boski, and I was invited to apply for the ICCP conference at Pultusk in Poland. And I want to acknowledge him because of the fact that his invitation brought me to ICCP. Subsequently, Heidi Keller has been instrumental and has mentored much of my work in the field of cross-cultural psychology, and I would like to acknowledge her presence in my academic and personal life. Tom Weisner has been a mentor, as more recently Barbara Rogoff, and I would like to acknowledge them as well. What do I say about Mariano? I have met him only once before, and we had such a warm interaction, and I'm so sorry that he's standing outside the gates of the bank this morning, trying to get through some of the work that has been piled onto him. But Mariano, I wish you were here, and thank you very much for your warm invitation, and I'm very happy to be in Costa Rica. I would like to dedicate my presentation this morning to the group of students who have volunteered their time and effort to make us so comfortable and to help us find our way when we were lost, and to help us navigate the conference so well. So thank you very much for yesterday when we were at the keynote speakers with Fernando and Heidi, I felt inspired because at some point the keynote speakers became Meet the Students. And I had a suggestion for ICCP that next time, let's just call it Meet the Students, because they spoke up, and you will see some of the conversations we had. I made last minute changes because I wanted to include some of the things you said yesterday. So thank you very much for yesterday. And let's start with my presentation. Tom began the conference with discussion of methods, and I think Heidi talked a lot about theory, and that helped me sort of position myself towards a slight shift in my presentation to talk more about something that Cynthia brought up and Barbara has also talked about, and to make my presentation a little bit political. And I hope you will excuse me because I'm going to talk only about my experience as an Indian psychologist. And I do not wish to say that this applies to everyone, but I'm hoping that some of the lessons that I have learned along the way from the positive experiences of scientific collaboration in my life have taught me that there are other ways of doing it. So thank you very much to my two main collaborators, Jan Valsena and Heidi Keller, who have shown me that there are other ways of doing this. So we, at the same time, create models and we also follow them. So there is this tension that Brad Shore talked about in his work. And I'm going to use that, I'm going to constantly reflect on this cycle of meaning making and then being determined by the meaning. So let me give you a quick overview of what I'm going to speak about. So I'm going to talk about psychology's, mainstream psychology's international model, a view from the East. And I would like to acknowledge that associations like the ICCP are not included, because that's the one place where I have, from my initial participation, felt comfortable, because culture was recognized as a part of psychology and not something that was done by other people. I will address the issue of applications in psychology, selected ones. I'm not going to talk about therapy, and I'm not going to talk about assessments and measurements, because I think that they have come up in other presentations. I think Sunita was talking a little bit about psychotherapy, and we've had discussions of measurement and assessments in other presentations, so I'm not going to go into those. But I will talk about school and international aid for welfare. I will talk in some detail about Indians and why we are so, why we don't fit really into psychology's neo-colonial model. And the applications that I select, as I said, are school and welfare. And concluding points, I'm going to speak about how I visualize a more just, a more socially just way of doing psychology. Experiences and applications. All the pictures that you will see, including the ones from Costa Rica, are mine. So I enjoy taking pictures as part of my work. So photo dialogue is part of this presentation. So let's look at psychology's international model. In the mainstream, you have psychology is universal and culture is something that other people do. And I think that has been a huge problem for many of us. There is this sanctified science, that the narrow path in the pursuit of the scientific method, talking about objectivity, quantification, experimentation, as elusive for us. You know, Indians are not very good at science. Yes, engineering and technology, fine, but in psychology, no, you're not good at psychology, we will teach you how to do it. These are gold standards that are quite elusive. They're literally at the pot at the end of the rainbow, which we will never reach. There is a separation of different disciplines in a way that is not familiar locally, and that Spivak has talked about the separation between literature and psychology, and also others. And I think history, politics, environmental studies, economics, these are subjects that have a lot to teach us and a lot to learn from us, and I worry that we don't attend enough to these subjects. The idea of the autonomous individual is very unfamiliar to us, and everything that happens is seen as an outcome of an individual's life experiences. Yesterday you mentioned that psychology, developmental psychology actually begins well before birth. So let us attend to some of these other influences, but mainstream psychology does not recognize them as we have been taught. There is, I fear, I attended a keynote address by Sternberg in the SRCD conference in Baltimore earlier this year, and he mentioned that, with reference to the concept of intelligence, that psychology is quite unwilling to change. There is an entrenchment in ideas. We build these industries and we want to remain loyal to them. There's the fear of the unknown. He identified academic laziness, persistence of socio-economic hierarchy, quantitative precision fallacy, and financial benefits. He feels that a lot of young students want change, but they don't get jobs, and therefore they go into courses and departments that promote the more traditional view of psychology. Another thing that Girishwar Mishra, whom some of you may know about, has talked about is that collaborations are usually vertical and not horizontal. And he identifies vertical collaborations as those that are mediated by the United States and Europe, whereas horizontal collaboration between countries that you can lose. I don't like the term global south, but I really don't find, I mean, third world is terrible and developing countries is bad too. So for lack of a better expression, that horizontal collaborations in the global south are not very popular. You have to have the headquarters has to be somewhere where psychology emerged as a scientific discipline. In India, there is a great deal of respect for Western psychology. Perhaps it's on account of post-colonial subaltern positions. It's based in our educational training. We have text boxes and textbooks. They do science, we have culture. All our libraries are dominated by textbooks from the West. Publishers force these books upon us, oftentimes free copies to be used in our lessons. People who create measures like the WPPSI or the Baileys flood us with requests to update our laboratories with tests, and therefore, administrators in our universities are much more likely to spend large amounts of money on measures that are perceived as being scientific in the desire to be updated. There is a greater value placed on values, ethics, and morality emerging from modernism. Oh, I missed out. Local beliefs are pseudoscience, religious mumbo jumbo to be dismissed in the desire to be more progressive. I'm talking about scholars in India. In the desire to be more progressive, scientific, academic, and international, we have to drop what we do at home. That's not science. Academic training, in my own experience, has created fractures between personal life and academic study. That's what we do in class, and what we do at home does not find place. So you sort of create these different worlds which you inhabit when you work as a psychologist in India. Being mediated through a singular lens of East-West dichotomy, I believe mutes both intercultural similarities and intracultural differences. Indians, I mean, I sometimes don't recognize the people I live among. I feel so different from them. So when culture is conflated with nationality, it becomes a problem for intracultural heterogeneity. Some of the experiences that I have had, and I have also watched or experienced other people having, some of them may be a bit uncomfortable to hear, that India is a favorable site. They are different. We need to have a sample from India, a token recognition of cultural difference. Local scholars are not that good with science. We need them for language, translations, and also to reduce cost, because it's not possible to take large teams to India. So a lot of Indian students in Western universities are encouraged to do the work back home. Research done locally is seen as unscientific. Faculty lack procedural precision, scientific rigor, unfit. The English that we write is unfit for publication. Minimal adaptations in design permitted to retain purity of purpose. The research project cannot be compromised. The field can be adjusted to fit the project. Collaborators bring funds, the locals follow. Co-authorship, international travel are the rewards we receive for the work that we do in collaborations. And I am so thankful for having collaborators who have permitted the travel of young scholars who collected the data and helped them to travel to the site where the analysis was being done, so that the meaning and interpretation and the findings were actually, they were participants and active creators of the way in which the data were going to be interpreted. And I'll give you a small example. Yesterday, Heidi mentioned that in the mirror recognition research that we did, that having mirrors is not a significant factor for the child. Now, in traditional Indian homes in certain regions, it is considered that thing you were mentioning yesterday, your heartbeat becomes rapid. Showing an infant a mirror before the child has self-recognition is seen as that the child will get so frightened of its own image, right? So there are many communities in which children are not shown mirrors. There are many communities that don't have mirrors. I mean, women have sometimes seen their reflection for the first time in a pond. So we raised this issue and said that you are asking us to go around villages where the villagers thought we were selling mirrors at some point. So we used to carry them on our heads. Isn't it likely that the presence or absence of a mirror in a child's life will impact the comfort with the testing? Immediately they responded and said, let's put that into the project. So that's the kind of instant response that we used to get in our collaborations. And unfortunately, a lot of my colleagues haven't had that kind of experience. Methods interpretations focus more on reliability rather than meaning and ecological validity. Local procedural problems are muted. Sample selection, in the latest collaboration that partly failed, I wouldn't say it's fully failed. We set up a lab in a local area. The parents just refused to come. They would say, oh, okay, we'll be here tomorrow, and you're waiting, and nobody would land up. And it was very hard for our collaborators to understand that Indian families, I mean, yesterday we were talking with the students, you were saying that some of your parents say no, right? I mean, the project is important for us, it's not important for parents. I mean, if the child falls sick or the neighbor drops in or you have someone, you suddenly decide to go somewhere, why is your project important for the parents or the families? It isn't. And if they don't come, I think it's their life, right? And they are doing us the honor of coming. So we had high attrition in this particular, but when you do the research in their homes, it may not be as standardized as a setting. They're much more willing to have you here. Expecting people to negotiate traffic or to walk long distance to come to the lab is not a reasonable expectation. I do believe that findings from other cultures, there is cherry picking of findings. You take what you like, and what doesn't fit in is, however important or significant or frequent it may be, it's ignored. And one of the most ridiculous things that I have found in the literature is calling Indians collectivistic. Believe me, if you've been on Indian roads, you know that's wrong. Everybody is fighting to get there first and don't mind even running you over. I mean, I don't see how that is collectivistic. For us, collectivism meant something very different, and a lot of Indian scholars have written, and other scholars have written, against dualisms like that. Within country, differences are minimized. So you take a sample of university students from an English-speaking college in University of Delhi, and you say that that's an Indian sample. That's just ridiculous. Meanings are mediated, silenced, ignored, or dismissed as incomprehensible, exotic, and as I have once been called in a conference presentation, seductive. Applications, let's come to the applications of psychology now. this is the second part of my presentation. Applications are defined by textbook categories. So there is parenting, self-help, well-being, intelligence, learning, creativity, emotional intelligence, and others. I call these bookstore categories. If you go into the psychology section of any bookstore, we have the opportunity to do that in Portland. They just had more books. The categories were pretty much the same. Self-help, how to overcome stress, how to make friends and stuff. And one of the categories that I have found very intriguing is the term childcare. When we teach developmental psychology or discuss it, when we say childcare, it immediately, you invoke the idea of a family or another person, a child being cared for by anyone. But if you look at journal articles, if you do a search on Google Scholar, or if you do a library search, if you type in childcare, you only get institutional substitute care. They don't refer to care in the home. Why? It's childcare, right? It's not substitute care, and it is something that we were never able to understand. And that's a small example of the ways in which the definition of childcare by Wikipedia, not an academic source, but that's how public knowledge is now accessed, otherwise known as daycare, is the care and supervision of a child or multiple children at a time whose ages range from 6 weeks, so before that it's not childcare, to 13 years, and then you stop, of course, because a 14-year-old is not a child anymore. Childcare is the action or skill of looking after children by a daycare center, nannies, babysitters, teachers. Where's the mother? I mean, on the one hand, we have this over-dramatization of the mother's position in the child's life, but a simple term like childcare. So in India, we do not have, in Indian languages, there is no equivalent term for parenting. It is the verb that we use is what is done to the child, not who is doing it. So anyone can care for children. So you can see how this separation of the academic meaning and the local meaning becomes, you create fractures with that. So it's guided by Euro-American ideologies, popular opinion, and fashion. So examples are, Sternberg talks about intelligence, and there is a whole discussion on neuroscience and the over dramatic use of neurosciences. If your child doesn't get enough food, these networks will build and the child will have problems. The international intervention agencies use this argument all the time. Promoters of preschools will say your child's brain will stop developing if you don't enlist your child in this Kumon or this particular task. So the industry uses neuroscience very well. Now, neuroscientists don't agree. There's a fabulous critique by Breuer, who, when he finished writing his book, a journalist came up to him and asked him, based on your long-standing experience and study of the neurosciences, what advice would you give parents? Journalists love to do that. What advice would you give parents to regarding the choice of nursery school? So he answers pretty quickly to say, based on my knowledge of neurosciences, absolutely nothing. Evidence-based, there is little discussion about the source and the selection of the evidence, and I'm not going to go into details because Heidi has already done that. You also saw this reference about low interpretive power of ideas, methods, measures, and solutions in terms of presentation. So I'm not going to go into that either. Let's look at appropriation. I mean, if you look at yoga, it's extremely popular around the world. Yesterday somebody told me that they are studying Kundalini yoga, and I was fascinated to hear that, but most of the, there are yoga, power yoga is actually an oxymoron because yoga is supposed to calm you down. You know, in traditional Indian belief, there is no such thing as power yoga because it raises you. Yoga is supposed to, the meaning of the word yoga is union. And I think people forget that. And it's a union between the different aspects of your psyche. Just moving your arms is not yoga. But it has been appropriated in public life, but psychology is not attending to this because yoga is religion and it's outside of our domain of study. India has elaborate theories that have significance for psychology, and I'm going to give a very small example of the Rasa theory later, but these are silenced or ignored again because of their association with religion. Why do applications fall so behind? Because I think they're largely bound to traditional mainstream ideas. Most popular one is culture as nationality. The second thing is funding. Managers of science decide what topics will receive attention and how. There is an intellectual inertia. It's easier to stay with the industry. Young scholars need affiliations to find jobs. So you can tell them whatever you like, be different, be creative, be original, but they need jobs at the end of the day. Academic trends, the attribution to specific research that fits the agenda. Complexity is eschewed, and I think Tom discussed this at length, and findings are oversimplified. Pilot tests are not discussed. Why did we change this particular thing? And again, I will not repeat what he said so eloquently. Industries thrive: psychometrics, teaching methods, international aid, publishers. So I think these are some of the reasons why applications fall behind. So I'm going to use Paul's quote and also give you relief from seeing so much text. This is a view of Arundel that we had on Monday. It was a spiritual experience for us. I'm going to skip this slide because many of these things have come up earlier, but I just liked the title and I wanted to flash it. Mind the gap between the field and the lab. I want to talk a little bit about if people were not different, they would have nothing to say to each other, and if they were not the same, they would not understand each other. This is the philosopher Hannah Arendt, whose quote I'm using. And I want to talk a little bit about my experience yesterday evening. As we were getting ready to leave for our meeting over dinner, the person behind the desk at the Hade Boutique Hotel asked me, "Can you tell me a little bit about what you're presenting tomorrow?" No, about your conference. So I gave him a brief, and he said, "Can you tell me what you are talking about?" And I said, "I'm going to speak a little about," and I gave him a brief, very brief idea of what I was saying. And he pulled up his left sleeve, and he had on his arm tattooed a verse from the Rig Veda. Then he showed me, he pulled up his other sleeve and showed me the Om tattoo. And he said, "I'm a Vedic scholar, and I teach the Vedas in Costa Rica, and I am very interested in what you would like to say." So there are people who, in the most unexpected of places, you will find resonance, you will find familiarity. And that's the kind of thing, that's the kind of basic humanity across the world that I want to tap on. And yet, this is a grandmother with 5 kids. Yet, we don't fit into what psychology has created for us. Salman Rushdie talks about places like India as the backyards of the world, where national and individual identities are negotiated between negotiated between the longing for coherence and the reality of fragmentation. How we are different and how different we are. Selected themes, please, this is not an attempt to talk about everything. I've just taken the family life cycle, the absence of the concept of parenting, I've already talked about that, the inclusive multiplicity of languages. Can you take a wild guess about how many languages? Some of you may know, and you don't need to. How many languages do we have in India? Sorry? Did someone say 200? Around 900 now, but in one measure there have also been 1,072. So that's the number of languages we live with. It's a huge problem for school education and trying to respect the native languages. And yet all of us educated people speak a language that we didn't have thanks to the British. But it also, I mean, I've often been asked how I speak English so well. It's because I was not beaten really, but kind of disciplined to speak it well. And we were actually punished in our missionary school for speaking in Hindi. So there was no choice. We didn't want to be punished. Learning is believed to be contextual and collaborative. We've had some discussions about and examples of that earlier. Intelligence is understood, and Girishwar Mishra has written a lot about this, in case you're interested, is understood as distributed. So who is considered intelligent is someone who has social awareness and who's not passive, and who takes into account somebody who is accommodative, is able to anticipate what the other person is saying. And I was very happy to hear about that expression in Barbara's presentation. My only regret in this conference, Mariano, has been that I didn't know Spanish. Next time, yes. Group, individual, self-other boundaries are configured differently. So it's very important to remember that how you speak about the self, that the other actually is believed to be inside of the self. And theories like the dialogical self theory are much more favorable to a better understanding. Emotions are understood differently, and so on. Family life, development, and care, some selected examples. It's 9:15, right? I have time. I forget when I'm talking how long it's been. So we have an indigenous theory. Many of the examples I'm using are from Hindu theory. And yesterday, my former student Shubhi was presenting her work in another symposium, and she was using Hindu metaphors and said that Hindu metaphors they draw from Hinduism, but Hinduism is not the only religion in India. So does it justify talking only about Hindu theory? So one of the things that Sudhir Thakkar, the well-known psychoanalyst, has said that some aspects of a Hindu way of living transcend ethnic boundaries. So it's a lot of the features of family life, this idea that older people need to become more distanced from family life, is, while at the same time respected for being older and having a lot more wisdom than a person who is much younger, these are ideal forms that are somewhat shared. So that sort of justifies your use of metaphors that draw from a particular religion, but I can understand if it is distasteful or uncomfortable for other ethnic groups. So rather than going into the details of ashrama theory, I would like to point on a particular aspect, that the individualism, collectivism, or autonomy relatedness dichotomy that we have is believed to play out differently at different ages. So to say that Indians are A or B would be highly inappropriate, because you're supposed to be quite separated. And here I would like to talk about Chitam Kikishvashi's separation of autonomy and interpersonal distance, because you can see them playing out in the ashrama theory. That you have to be, as a householder, you have to be very involved with others, but as you grow older, you have to distance yourself. So you can see that there is a fluctuating sense of interpersonal distance in the life cycle theory drawn from Hinduism. And yet we don't attend to that. Let's look at learning. We have a great tradition, oral tradition in the country. Knowledge or truth is seen to have three dimensions. Again, you might find some of these expressions very unfamiliar, and I don't mean to impose that on you, except to highlight the second last expression, the third last, which is anuplabdhi, which is a form of learning, and a very important form of learning, which is awareness of the absence of something. It is not something you see very much in other forms of discussing learning. Emotions are, we don't have 6 emotions, they're not divided into positive or negative, and 49 in all, of which 9 are stable emotions. But what I wanted to talk about is the importance that is placed on situations and mental states. If you are happy when you should be sad, it's seen as a huge problem. So it is the contextual, situational, personal intersection of place, time, and person that determines whether an emotion is favorable or not. So you cannot have, if you're crying, if you've lost someone, it's seen as a positive emotion. So the evaluation of emotions and its theory is very differently constructed locally. But we teach Bridges' theory of emotions still in our classrooms. Let's talk a bit about models of care. Very recently, I've completed a research project, and I was worried about this, how to frame, theoretically, how to frame the variation in the models, the settings in which children grow up. Very recently, as you may know, India just finished its elections, and the newspapers had, after all the results were out, there was some interesting articles that came out. And there was this article about this one family where 72 members live and eat together, and they consume, I think, 15 kilograms of rice every day. They actually eat together, and they had the age range of 8 months to 92 years. And that, I mean, even for an Indian, that's staggering. I mean, how do these people get along? Or maybe there's so many that it doesn't matter, I mean, if there are 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 2 generations, you fight with each other. I mean, forget it. What's the point of fighting, right? So I was trying to frame a model within which we could explain. So I said, suppose we take the one-on-one model. One child being taken care of by one mother. And this was in a particular study of families in and around Delhi. And I said, let's take more than one child and one adult. More than one adult and one child. And so you make a 2x2 table. And this is what the finding looked like. So it is not one child by one adult was actually the lowest in. And this analysis we did from video. So it doesn't mean that the father is gone, right? It's only for our data collection, how many people were with the child. So the many children being taken care of by many adults was the most frequent one. And thanks to the chapter that I co-authored with Heidi, this model has received some tension. What about this many by many model? What are the things that are different? I think there's more flexibility, adaptability. There's an ease of being with others. I don't wish to romanticize it. There are more fights as well. But I think that the child gets to experience many ways of living. You learn to live without your mother. You learn to live with people who don't really like you very much. And that's knowledge that I think that many children who are growing up in this even very nice and favorable one-by-one model, they don't experience any conflict or any contradiction or any, dislike. Here you're living with people, maybe your father's younger brother's wife doesn't really like you and keeps pushing you away. Well, deal with it, right? You get multiple perspectives on yourself. So if you've created something and somebody says, oh, that's fabulous, somebody else might say it's useless, So you get this multiple perspective on who you are and what you're like. So somebody thinks you're beautiful, well, maybe not the next person you encounter in the other room. Learning to live with people who may not always like you is, I've already talked about that. Protection from abuse. There are few places where you will find. So if you have physical punishment, if somebody is trying to beat you up, you can either run away or run to the person whom you can hide behind. I am not. My family is here and they always remind me that I have to be careful not to romanticize anything. And if I don't acknowledge their presence today, they're the final test of the authenticity of what I say. But if I don't acknowledge the fact that, it's not always a pretty story, but it is different from the story that we hear. Men are usually always included. So if the mother is doing something, the older men sometimes who are probably not going to the farms anymore if it's an agricultural family, or older persons do a lot of the childcare when the researchers are not around. But when the research team ever enters in contact, the men just move out and let the women handle it. So I've written with Jaipal Roopnarayan in a publication that the visibility of Indian men in the family is reduced because they exit when the research team enters. They think that this is something that women should handle. I do believe that bullying is contained because siblings protect each other. You learn from mixed ages. There is a loose, informal, constant supervision by adults. Learning to do things for as well as accepting being cared for, non-maternal care. Learning from and teaching others closer to one's age. Knowledge of things adults would avoid. How far will the trajectory of your spit go if you stand at this point and spit forward? Which is a game I saw some children playing in my last trip. Peers may mislead you about some of these things. The family will not talk about these things, but your siblings might. So these are just to provide you relief from the text. Some pictures. Let me come to applications now, and I will select just two, school and learning, and this should be the final part of my talk. This is a quote from Robert Serpell, whose work I admire greatly. During the 19th and 20th centuries, two social institutions were exported from Western Europe and the USA to the rest of the world, the factory and the school. The history of that export is heavy with political domination, economic exploitation, as well as religious proselytization. Under the guise of promoting development, the physical and social sciences are routinely deployed as key intellectual resources for the optimal design of public policies, professional practices, and education to modernize the cultures of the recipients of aid. Learning in the home and school creates fractures in the lives of children. There's a long-standing respect for convent education, which the idea of missionary schools is to repair and remodel children. I have personally experienced how you can, in your impressionable years, become distanced from your family. Ecological and social knowledge finds no place in school, so the children come empty-headed almost to class. There is a disjuncture from cultural moorings. With few exceptions, the child is expected to abandon familiar ways like language, food, dance, poetry. What Angela Valenzuela has written about is subtractive education. Formal schooling is disproportionately focused on literacy and numeracy, the dismissal of oral traditions. Remember, we are an oral-dominated tradition. Early childhood interventions are guided by demands of later schooling. So, it's almost as if there is a violent neighborhood, you beat up the child to get used to a later violence. There is some research on children growing up in Baltimore about the socialization for anger and aggression. You may be familiar with. There are more people, few schools. We actually don't have enough schools, and Indian parents and Indian families are highly motivated towards getting their kids to school. That has led to a surge in private unregulated schools, which I see as a major problem. What are the consequences of learning and participation? The middle and upper classes children thrive. Poor rural tribal poor are marginalized. They are pulled apart between worlds. There is an undermining of values, ethics, and morality from the community. Familiar strategies and knowledge is lost. Most forthcoming children among the poor, as Barbara Rogoff has talked about, are actually pushed out from school because they are hard to handle. Individual task performance becomes associated with failure over time. The sustained separation of home and school, particularly, there is a wonderful publication by Snigdha Poonam, which talks about the dreamers, which is, she studies the youth that have become lost between these two worlds and how they are now trying to become rich by posting pop-ups in YouTube videos, and they've made quite a lot of money doing that. So you can blame neocolonialism on your annoying pop-ups. Some more pictures. Let's talk now about international aid. So there are missions, colonies, companies in the past, and we look at neocolonialism, neoliberalism, and then teaching other people how to lead their life. There is an imbalance of power based on socioeconomic differences. India was not always poor. I think a lot of, it's like, I go to your home, I take away all your money, and then I call you poor. It's like that. And also migration. We had a keynote address by Cynthia Garcia Cole, where she talked about immigration as a phenomenon. And I want to highlight, as I did in my comment to her, that immigrants are poor people moving to richer places, whereas the expression immigrant cannot be used for a Danish diplomat living in India. The expression we use is expatriate. And yet, and the inequality between the lives of immigrants and expats is dramatic. So people coming from wealthier countries to India to work, live the lives that Indians also, some of the wealthiest Indians don't have access to. They're permitted to have schools in their own languages. I mean, we don't have native languages for our own children, but we have in places where real estate is very expensive. missions, diplomatic missions and international aid workers are allowed to set up their schools so that when they don't go back, they don't feel alienated from their own people. They have no need to become part of the local culture because the range of domestic helpers that they are provided are all trained in the ways of the wealthy. So there is a great deal to talk about when we talk about immigration. I always like to bring up the discussion about expatriates and the walls that are created to protect them from the filth and the mess and the heat and the poverty and the imagined discomfort of living in the global south. Let's take a look at child rights and the CRC, which is the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Mariano helped me a great deal to find some of the references for a publication that I was doing, and I would like to acknowledge that. In the traditional view, so industrialization and individualization in the West, there was a shrinking family size, low fertility rates, separation of grandparents about 3 or 4 centuries ago. In this view, in the current view, children have become frail, innocent, and vulnerable, and in need of protection. The insecurity became translated into a global policy. That's not how children are viewed in other parts of the world. UNICEF's agenda for emergency aid post-war was drastically reduced. They needed a new agenda. A similar thing I came to know about when I overheard, I'm allowed to talk about overheard conversations, right? When I overheard that there was a point at which the Indian government had added a child tax to all movie tickets in India. You know we love our movies, right? And there was an emergency meeting held at UNICEF because they were scared that now that the Indian government is so flush with funds, are we going to become redundant? And they made new policies to respond to the fact that they may become redundant. So I think UNICEF works most to its own survival than for the welfare of children, but that is my personal view, and I'm willing to accept that it may not be the only view. We hope that there will be some change in this position. There was a failure of the structural adjustment programs and international aid. Child rights as an idea is firmly based in globalization, and the CRC was written and signed in 1989. How many of you know that there are some countries that have not ratified the CRC? You know that the United States and Somalia are the 2 countries that have still failed to ratify. Why? I have had the privilege of hearing a debate about why the US has not signed. They believe that the sanctity of the family and the state will be, they will not have an international body whose headquarters they hung dictate terms of how they should bring up their children. But everybody else can, including the UK, right? Including Germany is a signatory. India was one of the most enthusiastic signatories of the CRC as soon as it was formulated. So it was ratified. I do believe that the convention has double standards. You may or may not agree with me. The child was globalized and separated from its context, and development was separated from culture. I see these, this is Erica Berman's view, I see these as a huge loss. Diversity is seen as a threat, so the policing of childhood, especially in the case of immigrants from the global south to other countries, has become an issue with which Heidi Keller has been working strongly in Germany. India was eager to be seen. You know how good we are at wanting to please the West. India was eager to be seen as favorable to human rights in the CRC. So the critical debate of child rights did not ever take place locally. And this is a paper by Raman in the year 2000. So let us look at the Care for Child Development package. I'm quoting a very small section.
and I will highlight problems that I object to. Globally, over 200 million children do not reach their developmental potential in the first 5 years of life because they live in poverty and have poor health services, nutrition. I agree. I do not agree that they have poor psychosocial care always. It cannot be said. It's not just in one sentence that you can say all of this. Yes, some may have, but I don't think it's a given. These disadvantaged children do poorly in school and subsequently have low incomes, high fertility, and I seriously object to high criminality, and provide poor care for their own children. So we are stuck actually. We're going to keep hitting our kids and making them into violent people, and you know, it is this. Actually, this whole argument defeats the need for international aid, because we're going to continue to do this for the rest of our lives. Anyway, it makes me a bit angry, but it's okay. The international aid, Jonathan Haidt wrote this with reference to university education and classroom behavior in US universities, but I'm using the expression, I do believe that a large majority of people working in this sector are well-meaning, but it's a well-meaning bad idea as it is being practiced, because it's based on a different ideology, the assumptions of uniformity with little regard to cultural context. There is a circumscribed assumption of what a good life is. There's an overemphasis on fragmented claims from the neurosciences. Poor are to be blamed for their poverty. So you do them a double injustice. First of all, they're living in difficult circumstances, and then you tell them that how they're living is not good. Philanthrocapitalism, the Gates and the other foundations, they derive inspiration from psychology's dominant model. International aid, as actually in a criticism by the University of Chicago scholar Raghuram Rajan and his colleague Subramaniam, has done a massive international assessment of aid, and they have concluded that international aid has failed to end poverty, and we need to rethink it. I'm going to end by talking about psychology for social justice and the urgent need to address how developmental psychology is being applied in the world, worldwide, whether it is to do with measurements, methods, theories, concepts, or applications. Just some relief for you. And a quotation from a recent scholar I learned about in Portland. I think we need to free ourselves from what we already know. The earth is telling us that ideas emerging from modernism are not sustainable. Question everything. If it cannot be questioned, it's not science. Regularly audit all transfers of knowledge to application, like measures, methods, therapies, interventions. Expand the lens. View culture, context as constitutive. Accept multiple solutions and not singular models. Democratize the research process. Trust researchers. Reduce gatekeepers. Reduce expenses. There are ways of doing research that are cheaper, that you can do by just simply looking around. Promote horizontal collaborations. Increase openness. Publicize widely informal and informal locations. Organize debates and conferences, and this is from yesterday's discussion, and I suggest to the IACCP, we need to review the role of institutional ethics committees and IRBs, because although in the West, in USA particularly, you are actually making review boards more flexible, countries like India are in the desire to become updated and scientific and good and recognized, are clamping down on research done and asking for written consent forms, and most IRBs are required to have a medical doctor who's usually the loudest and the most rigid of all I see that as a huge problem for productive research in India. I think researchers, after so many years of training, you need to trust professors that they will not abuse or exploit situations. Another thing I think is very important, and it came up yesterday again in Meet the Student session, was adopt humility as a scholar, as a researcher, as an expert. You are who you are because of the people you study. Their lives are more important than your work. Believe me, you need to accept that. They have the right not to engage with your project. Address issues of child protection for immigrants. Engage with others in all steps of practice: interdisciplinary, intercultural collaborations, intersectionality, social justice. Protect cultural heritage of immigrants as we do for expatriates. Re-examine positions on poverty, on affluence. Focus on ecological wisdom and people's right to self-determination and meaning. Eschew subtractive approaches and applications. Strengthen attention to alternative meanings, methods, and discourses. Discuss research and theory with scholars from all areas: historians, environmentalists, literateurs, economists. And in one of our sessions in research methods, we were told, discuss your research project with your grandmother. Once she understands your findings, your PhD is complete. Between unprecedented possibilities for engagement and escalating exclusions like wars, psychology offers reason and opportunity to foster enduring, strong, genuine, collaborative, and trusting international academic alliances. Associations like IACCP are best placed to lead these shifts. I'm going to end with a story because Indians cannot help but tell stories. And it's up there for you to follow with me. In a South Indian folk tale, as told elsewhere, one dark night an old woman was searching intently for something in the street. A passerby asked her, "Have you lost something?" She answered, "Yes, I've lost my keys. I've been looking for them all evening." "Where did you lose them?" the passerby asked. "I don't know, maybe inside the house." "Then why are you looking for them here?" "Because it's dark in there and I don't have oil in my lamps and I can see much better under the streetlights. And this is the eminent scholar A.K. Ramanujan, whom some of you may know. He writes that until recently, many studies of Indian civilization have been conducted on that principle. Look for it under the light, in well-lit public spaces that we already know. There we have, of course, found precious things. We need to move indoors to the expressive culture of the household to look for our keys. As often happens, we may not often find what we are looking for, but we will find all sorts of other things that we may not even know we have lost or even have. Thank you very much.